After an HOA illegally destroyed my greenhouse overnight, I exposed their corrupt empire and turned our entire community against them. But the real question is, how did a grieving gardener like me manage to take down a powerful HOA president and her army of Karens? Welcome to our channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. I never thought I'd be the one to bring down an entire HOA, but when you mess with someone's dream, you better be ready for what comes next. That greenhouse wasn't just a hobby. It was my connection to Sarah. She'd always wanted us to grow our own food, live sustainably, and teach the neighborhood kids about nature. After losing her to cancer last year, building that greenhouse became my way of keeping her dreams alive. I spent 6 months planning everything perfectly. I got all the city permits, checked building codes, and even hired a certified contractor. The greenhouse was beautiful, 12 feet tall, with special glass panels that could handle any weather. I made sure it matched our house colors and didn't block anyone's view. The neighbors loved it. Mrs. Chan next door even asked if she could grow her special Chinese vegetables in there come winter. But Karen Thompson had other ideas. From the day construction started, she'd park her giant SUV across the street, taking pictures and scribbling in her little notebook. I tried being friendly, invited her to see the plans, and explained how it would benefit the community. She just gave me that fake smile and said, "We'll see about that." The first warning letter came 3 days after the greenhouse was finished. Unapproved architectural modification, it said. I sent them copies of all my permits and approvals, but they sent another letter. I invited them to inspect it. They scheduled 3 inspections and never showed up. Each time, I took time off work and waited. Each time, nothing. Then the fine started, $100 per day for noncompliance. When I tried to appeal, Karen scheduled the hearing for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, knowing I couldn't miss work. Every attempt to reason with them was met with more paperwork, more delays, and more fines. Last night, I was working late in the greenhouse, organizing my seed collection. Sarah and I had gathered seeds from all over the world during our travels. Each packet had a memory attached to it. The tomatoes from that little farm in Italy, the peppers from a market in Thailand. Around midnight, I finally went inside, looking forward to starting the spring planting tomorrow. The crash woke me at 3 a.m. By the time I ran outside in my pajamas, it was too late. A contractor's truck was pulling away, and my greenhouse, my beautiful greenhouse, was nothing but broken glass and twisted metal. All our seeds scattered in the wind. Sarah's garden dreams shattered on our lawn. Karen was standing there in her bathrobe, arms crossed, that smug smile on her face. "Should have followed the rules," she said, waving a piece of paper. Emergency removal order due to safety. Concerns behind her other board members watched from their windows like vultures, waiting for their next victim. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just started taking pictures of the destruction of Karen and the truck driving away. That's when I noticed something odd about the order she was holding. The paper had a watermark I recognized from my days working in document processing. It wasn't just any watermark. It was from a company that went out of business 3 months ago. As I picked up pieces of glass from what used to be my greenhouse, something caught my eye under a broken panel. Partially covered in dirt was Karen's little notebook, the one she'd been writing in all those weeks. It must have fallen during the chaos. I picked it up, brushed off the soil, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about my greenhouse anymore. Karen had been planning this for months. But she made one crucial mistake. She didn't know who she was dealing with, and she certainly didn't know about the security cameras I'd installed after the first warning letter. Cameras that caught everything, including conversations she definitely wouldn't want anyone else to hear. I walked back inside, notebook in hand, already forming a plan. If Karen wanted to play hardball, she was about to learn that destroying my greenhouse was the biggest mistake the HOA would ever make. But first, I needed to make a few phone calls, starting with my old friend Tom, who just happened to be a retired real estate lawyer with a particular hatred for homeowners associations. I couldn't sleep that night, staring at the pile of broken glass that used to be my greenhouse. Something about the timing felt wrong. They destroyed it at 3 a.m., like thieves in the night. While picking through the mess, I found a crumpled paper that would change everything. It was a demolition order signed by Karen 3 weeks before their so-called emergency meeting about my greenhouse. My hands were shaking as I read it. They had planned this all along. I called my neighbor Tom, who used to be a lawyer before retiring. He came over, still wearing his bathrobe, coffee in hand. When I showed him the paper, his eyes went wide. "This is illegal," he said, pulling out his reading glasses. "They can't approve demolition before a formal review. Keep this safe." That's what Tom told me about his own run-in with Karen. Last month, she'd forced him to remove his daughter's treehouse, claiming it violated height restrictions. But when we checked the HOA guidelines together, we found rich people like the Wilsons on Oak Street had similar structures in their yards. The difference? They were friends with Karen. I started taking walks around the neighborhood, camera in hand. Every day, I noticed more strange things. The Patels had to remove their cultural decorations, while Karen's giant Christmas display stayed up year-round. Mrs. Rodriguez got fined for her rose bushes being 2 inches too tall, but Karen's overgrown. Hedges blocked the entire sidewalk. Tom and I created a spreadsheet of every violation notice from the past year. A pattern emerged. If you were friends with Karen or used her brother's landscaping company, your violations mysteriously disappeared. But if you opposed her at meetings or hired other contractors, you got hit with fine after fine. We dug deeper into public records. The HOA's financial statements showed they paid Karen's brother's company triple the market rate for basic maintenance. When we looked up property records, we discovered Karen had been using HOA funds to pay for improvements to her own home, disguising them as community projects. But the real shocker came when elderly Mr. Chun from down the street shared his story. Karen had forced him to remove his wheelchair ramp, claiming it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. The next week, her company installed a new one, charging him $5,000 for a job that should have cost $1,000. He showed us all the paperwork, his hands trembling as he handed over the documents. I started secretly recording our HOA meetings. Karen would shut down anyone who questioned her decisions, claiming they were disrupting the peace. But I noticed how she'd win over certain board members before important votes. Everything was choreographed like a twisted neighborhood play where she was both director and star. Late one night, while reviewing old meeting minutes, I found something that made my blood run cold. The week before destroying my greenhouse, Karen had signed a contract with a new construction company, one that her daughter had just started. They were planning to build a community center right where my greenhouse stood. The demolition wasn't about rules. It was about making her family richer. I gathered security footage from my cameras and neighbors' doorbell videos. They showed Karen's contractors scoping out my property days before the destruction. In one clip, you can hear her clearly saying, "Make sure it's done when no one's watching." But I had to be careful. Karen had friends in the city council and had already threatened to put liens on homes of people who opposed her. I needed more proof, more witnesses, more ammunition for what would become the biggest fight of my life. As I sat in my garden that night, looking at the empty space where my greenhouse once stood, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every neighbor who'd been bullied, every family who'd been bankrupted by bogus fines, every elderly person forced to live in fear of Karen's next inspection. Tom called me the next morning, excitement in his voice. "I found something," he said, "something big. Meet me at the coffee shop in an hour, and whatever you do, don't let Karen know we're onto her." But what Tom didn't know was that Karen was sitting 2 tables away from us at that very coffee shop, pretending to read a magazine while hanging on to every word we said. I felt my hands shaking as I walked into the coffee shop. Community center carrying a simple USB drive that would change everything. Karen stood at the podium like she owned the place, wearing that fake smile she always used when she was about to ruin someone's day. Next on the agenda, she announced discussing the unauthorized structures that are ruining our property values. That was my cue. I hadn't slept for 3 days straight, going through every document Tom had helped me find. My heart was pounding as I raised my hand. I'd like to present some findings about our HOA's financial management. Karen tried to shut me down immediately. "That's not on the agenda," she snapped. But I had already predicted this move. I looked around the room at the faces I'd spent weeks talking to. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose grandson couldn't have his therapy pool. Mr. Chun, forced to remove his solar panels, the Patels who got fined for having a religious celebration. I had gathered all their stories, and they were ready to back me up. Actually, Tom spoke up from the back. According to HOA Bylaw 7.3, any homeowner can present concerns during open forum. I saw Karen's eye twitch. She didn't expect a retired lawyer to be on my side. I plugged in my USB drive, and the projector lit up with years of bank statements. "Let's start with the landscaping contracts," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Interesting how Mountain View Services charges us triple the market rate. Even more interesting that they share an address with Karen's son-in-law's business." The room got so quiet you could hear the old heating system creaking. I clicked to the next slide. "Or how about the $50,000 emergency roof repair fund that was approved last year?" Funny thing, I checked with every roofer in the county. None of them did any work here. Karen's face went from red to purple. "This is slander," she shouted. But I was ready for that too. I pulled out a stack of notarized documents. "Everything here is public record, Karen, including the forms you backdated to justify destroying my greenhouse." That's when Mrs. Rodriguez stood up. "They fined me $500 for my grandson's therapy pool." Then Mr. Chin joined in. "They threatened to put a lien on my house over solar panels." Soon the whole room was sharing stories, years of pin-up frustration pouring out. I showed them everything. The inflated contractor bills, the selective enforcement patterns, the mysterious consulting fees paid to shell companies. With each revelation, Karen's support crumbled. Her loyal board members started inching away from her, pretending they knew nothing about it. The final blow came when I played the security footage from my greenhouse demolition, synchronized with timestamps from Karen's emails ordering the destruction before any official review. "This isn't just unfair," I explained. "It's illegal." Board member Lisa Jenkins cracked first. "Karen told us it was all standard procedure," she blurted out. "She said we'd lose our property values if we didn't maintain strict control." I watched his deck. The saga of Karen's careful control unraveled in minutes. People were already calling the police, demanding investigations. But the sweetest moment came when old Mrs. Peterson, who everyone thought was asleep in the corner, spoke up. "I've been recording HOA meetings for 30 years, she announced. "Got them all right here on my phone, including the one where Karen bragged about taking kickbacks." Karen lunged for the exit, but two homeowners blocked her path. Outside, red and blue lights were already flashing as the police escorted her out. She screamed about property values and community standards, but nobody was listening anymore. They were too busy planning the community garden that would replace her precious ornamental lawn. I stood there watching my neighbors hugging and crying, feeling a mix of triumph and exhaustion. Tom patted my shoulder. "You did it, kid," he said. "But you know this is just the beginning, right? Wait until you see what we found in the HOA's offshore accounts." The room fell silent again. What else had Karen been hiding from us all these years? The morning of the state investigation felt like the calm before a storm. I sat in my kitchen watching the sunrise through my broken greenhouse frame when police cars quietly rolled into our neighborhood. No sirens, just purpose. Karen was doing her usual morning power walk when they approached her. I'll never forget how her designer exercise outfit clashed with the handcuffs. The evidence was too strong to ignore. Our records showed how Karen and her board had been charging special assessment fees for repairs that never happened. The money trail led to luxury vacations, personal home renovations, and even a beach house in Florida, all paid for with our HOA dues. When the forensic accountants finished their review, the total stolen amount was closer to $300,000, not just the $200,000 we initially found. The local news couldn't resist the story. HOA President's House of Cards collapses made front-page news. Reporters interviewed families who'd lost their homes to excessive HOA fines, elderly residents who'd been bullied, and young couples who'd been forced to paint their houses 3 times because the shade of beige wasn't quite right. Each story was like another nail in Karen's legal coffin. But the biggest surprise came from Karen's own assistant, Jenny. She broke down during questioning and revealed how Karen had been running a kickback scheme with local contractors. Every time someone was forced to use an approved vendor for repairs, Karen got 30% of the fee. From my greenhouse destruction, she made $5,000 from that single act of cruelty. The community meeting to dissolve the HOA was packed. People who'd never spoken to each other were suddenly united. Tom, my lawyer neighbor, presented a simple new structure, a voluntary neighborhood council with transparent finances and term limits. No more paint color police, no more measuring grass height with rulers. When we voted the decision, it was unanimous. Even Karen's best friend, Susan, raised her hand to end the HOA. Within weeks, our neighborhood transformed. The community garden I built became a gathering spot. Mrs. Rodriguez, who Karen had fined for growing tomatoes in her front yard, now teaches gardening classes to kids. The Williams family, who'd been cited for their son's wheelchair ramp, helped design accessible paths through the garden. Even Tom, who'd lost his beloved rose bushes to Karen's rules, started a butterfly garden. My new greenhouse rose from the ashes of the old one, twice as big and 10 times more meaningful. The construction was a community effort. Neighbors brought materials, skills, and support. We built it together, making sure it was sturdy enough to withstand any storm, natural or otherwise. Sarah would have loved seeing how her dream of a community garden brought everyone together. The final blow came when Karen and 3 board members were sentenced to 5 years in prison. It might seem harsh for HOA violations, but the judge was clear. This wasn't about gardens or paint colors. It was about abuse of power and criminal fraud. As she was led away, Karen finally looked me in the eye. For the first time, I saw something there besides entitlement, regret. Today, our neighborhood is different. We still have rules, but they make sense. The money we save on HOA fees goes to things that matter. A scholarship fund for local kids, community events, and maintaining our shared spaces. The garden produces enough vegetables to support our local food bank. People actually talk to each other, and instead of writing violation notices, sometimes I sit in my greenhouse, surrounded by the plants Sarah loved, and think about how one act of destruction led to so much growth. Karen's need for control didn't just destroy my greenhouse, it destroyed her own life. But from those broken pieces, we built something better, a real community. Yesterday, I got a letter from prison. Karen wants to apologize in person. After everything that happened, I'm not sure how to feel about that. But maybe, just maybe, some seeds of change can grow in the most unexpected places. You'd think this story would end with Karen in jail, but life has a funny way of teaching us bigger lessons. I was tending to our community garden one rainy morning when a teenage girl approached me in tears. She introduced herself as Karen's daughter, Emma. She told me how her mom had lost everything, their house, her reputation, and even her family. Her dad had left them, unable to handle the shame of the scandal. Emma wasn't there to make excuses for her mom. Instead, she asked if she could volunteer in our garden. She'd been watching how it brought people together, how neighbors who used to avoid each other now shared growing tips and fresh vegetables. I remembered how my late wife, Sarah, always said that gardens heal more than just hunger. The community was split when I suggested letting Emma help. Tom, my lawyer friend, thought I was crazy after everything her mother did. He asked, but I saw something in Emma that reminded me of myself after losing Sarah. Someone looking for a way to grow something good from something broken. We started small. Emma helped with weeding and watering. Soon, she was teaching younger kids about composting and organizing seed-sharing events. When some neighbors complained, I showed them the security footage from the day the old greenhouse was destroyed. Emma hadn't been there. She shouldn't have to pay for her mother's crimes. Then came the biggest test. Karen was released early for good behavior, and Emma asked if her mom could visit the garden. The same garden that existed because of Karen's attempt to destroy my original greenhouse. I spent a week thinking about it, remembering all the pain and anger, but Sarah's voice kept coming back to me. The best revenge is growing something beautiful where someone tried to hurt you. The day Karen visited, she was different. Prison had stripped away her designer clothes and superior attitude. She stood at the garden entrance, staring at the thriving greenhouse she'd once ordered destroyed. Now it was surrounded by dozens of smaller garden plots alive with vegetables, flowers, and laughing children. The garden had become the heart of our neighborhood, exactly what she'd always claimed to want when she ran the HOA. I walked up to her holding a basket of fresh tomatoes from the vine Sarah and I had originally planted together. Karen started to cry. Not the fake tears she'd used in HOA meetings, but real, messy tears of regret. She asked if she could volunteer at the garden too, not as a leader or organizer, just as someone willing to get her hands dirty and learn. Some people said I was too forgiving. Maybe they were right. But as I watched Karen learn to plant seedlings alongside neighbors she once fined for having the wrong color mailbox, I realized something powerful. The garden didn't just grow food, it grew second chances. Today, our neighborhood is known for having the largest community garden system in the state. We're teaching other communities how to break free from toxic HOAs and build something better. Emma runs our youth gardening program, and Karen, well, she's not exactly beloved, but she's finding her way one plant at a time. I still miss Sarah every day, but I know she'd be proud. Sometimes I sit in the greenhouse at sunset, surrounded by the green life we've created, and I can almost hear her laughing at how it all turned out. Who would have thought that destroying my greenhouse would lead to growing something far bigger than I ever imagined? But I wonder what would have happened if I'd just given up that morning when I found my greenhouse in pieces.